15 days after the ultimatum, things started breaking. At first, nobody connected the small problems. A power fluctuation on Central Station, a delayed medical shipment to the outer colonies, a security team that did not show up for their patrol shift. These things happen sometimes. The galaxy was big and complicated. Minor issues were normal, but the problems kept coming. Jiwan Yoon stood in the maintenance control room of Central Station and watched the Krothian engineers stare at the displays. They looked confused and worried. One of them finally asked her how to reset the power distribution system. Jiwan had been maintaining this station for 12 years. She knew every system, every backup, every quirk of the aging equipment. She had kept everything running smoothly, while the Krothian administrators took credit for the station's excellent performance record. Now she was leaving, and the Krothians were realizing they had no idea how anything worked. She explained the reset procedure slowly and carefully. The lead engineer wrote everything down, his hands shaking slightly. He asked how often this needed to be done. Jiwan told him the system required monitoring every 6 hours. There were 3,000 different subsystems on the station. Each one had its own maintenance schedule. Each one could fail in unique ways. The engineer's face went pale. He asked how many people it took to maintain everything. Jiwan said there were 2 human engineers on duty at all times. Just 2. The Krothian team had 12 engineers. They would need at least 50 to match the efficiency of the 2 humans they were replacing. And they did not have 50. They barely had 12. Jiwan finished her shift and gathered her belongings. As she walked out, the Krothian engineer thanked her quietly. He said he had never realized how much work she did. She smiled sadly and told him most people never realized. That was the problem. Across the galaxy, the same scene played out in hundreds of locations. Human workers prepared to leave. Alien replacements arrived and discovered they had no idea what they were getting into. Captain Nari Choi pulled her peacekeeping forces out of the Antares sector. For 20 years, her teams had kept the peace between 2 species who had ancient territorial disputes. Everyone said the region was stable now. The old conflicts were forgotten, but stability required constant work. Nari's people had stopped dozens of small incidents from becoming big problems. They had mediated disputes, prevented misunderstandings, and kept communication open between both sides. It was quiet, unglamorous work that nobody noticed, until it stopped. The new peacekeeping force arrived 3 days after Nari's team left. They were well-trained and professional, but they did not know the local history. They did not understand the subtle tensions. They did not have relationships with the community leaders on both sides. Within a week, a border incident turned violent. Within 2 weeks, both sides had mobilized their militias. The new peacekeepers tried to intervene, but they were too late and too inexperienced. The fighting spread. Nari heard about it while her ship was traveling to human space. She sat in her quarters and read the casualty reports. People she had known personally were dead. A peace she had spent 20 years building was collapsing. She wanted to turn around and fix it, but she knew that would solve nothing. The galaxy needed to learn that peace required work, not just presence. Dr. Yuna Shin withdrew her medical teams from the Disaster Response Network. She had been coordinating emergency medical services across 12 sectors for 8 years. Her people responded to disease outbreaks, industrial accidents, natural disasters, and medical emergencies of all kinds. They had developed detailed protocols for everything. They had trained local medics and stockpiled supplies, and created communication systems that could coordinate hundreds of medical teams across vast distances. The alien species had excellent medical knowledge. They could treat any disease or injury, but they had never learned disaster management. They did not know how to triage hundreds of patients at once, or how to set up field hospitals in emergency conditions, or how to coordinate supplies during chaos. 2 weeks after Yuna left, a disease outbreak hit a mining colony. The local medical team had the right medicine, but they did not know how to contain the spread. They did not implement quarantine procedures fast enough. They did not coordinate with neighboring systems to prepare for refugees. By the time council medical experts arrived, hundreds were dead. The disease had spread to 3 other colonies. Yuna read the reports and felt sick. She knew exactly what had gone wrong. Every mistake was something her teams had learned to prevent years ago, but knowledge was useless if nobody learned it until disaster struck. Lieutenant Dae-hyun Ko shut down the human logistics network. He had spent his entire career coordinating supply chains across Council space. Food, medicine, equipment, raw materials. Thousands of ships moving millions of tons of cargo every day. Most species thought logistics was simple. You ordered something, it arrived. They did not see the complex coordination required. Predicting demand, routing ships efficiently, maintaining backup supplies, adapting to disruptions, communicating with thousands of independent captains. Daehyun's team had made it look easy because they were good at their jobs. When the system stopped, the illusion shattered. Supply ships missed deliveries because nobody coordinated their routes. Warehouses ran out of stock because nobody had predicted demand. Urgent shipments got delayed because nobody prioritized them. The entire trade network started falling apart. Colonies that depended on food imports started rationing. Manufacturing centers shut down because they did not have raw materials. Prices spiked as shortages spread. The economic damage mounted daily. The council held emergency meetings every day. Chancellor Vess looked exhausted as she listened to report after report. Trade down 40%. Security incidents up 200%. Medical emergencies overwhelming local systems. Infrastructure failures accelerating. Every meeting revealed new problems. Things the council had assumed just worked were actually maintained by human effort. Services they thought were automatic required constant human attention. Systems they believed were stable depended on human expertise. A Zalvid trade representative stood up and asked the question everyone was thinking. How had humans been doing all of this without anyone noticing? The answer was simple and damning. Humans had been working while everyone else talked. When problems arose, humans fixed them immediately instead of forming committees. When systems needed maintenance, humans did it without waiting for authorization. When emergencies happened, humans responded without debating jurisdiction. The council had been taking credit for success that human labor made possible. Day 30 arrived. The last human ships departed council space. Millions of human workers, engineers, medics, peacekeepers, and administrators left their posts. They did not go because they hated the other species. They left because they could not keep carrying the burden alone. A Krothian trader watched the human convoy pass his station. He said quietly what many were starting to realize. We never knew how much we needed them. We thought they were just another small species in the council. We never looked closely enough to see they were holding everything together. Chancellor Vess sent a final message to the human delegation. She asked for negotiations, for discussions, for another chance to work together. Taeyang Kim's response was brief. Talk to us when you are ready to act, not discuss. We are done watching people die while you debate. The transmission ended. The galaxy entered a new era. For the first time in centuries, the council had to manage its own problems. The question was whether they could learn fast enough to survive. Taeyang Kim sat in the back row of the council chamber and tried to remember why he had once believed in this place. Around him, 300 alien representatives argued about the same problem they had been discussing for 8 months. Pirates were attacking ships in the outer regions. People were dying. Trade was suffering. Everyone agreed something needed to be done. Nobody was doing anything. The Krothian delegate stood at the center platform, his long robes flowing as he gestured dramatically. He spoke for 20 minutes about the importance of respecting territorial boundaries. The Zalvid representative responded with a 30-minute speech about trade protection protocols. Then someone else wanted to form a committee to study the issue. Another voice suggested waiting for more data. Taeyang had heard it all before. He had been coming to this chamber for 40 years, ever since humanity joined the Galactic Council. Back then, he had been young and excited. He believed the Council represented the best of civilization, different species working together, solving problems through discussion and cooperation. That was before he understood the difference between talking about problems and actually fixing them. His assistant, a young woman named Minji Park, leaned over and whispered in his ear. Her voice was tight with controlled anger. Another human cargo ship had been destroyed. 300 people were dead. The pirates were getting bolder because they knew nobody would stop them. Taeyang closed his eyes. 300 more names to add to the list. 300 more families who would never see their loved ones again. And here in the council chamber, the representatives were still debating whether they had the authority to intervene. He looked around the chamber at the other species. The Krothians were famous for their wisdom and patience. The Zalvids were master traders. The Velnari were brilliant scientists. Every species here had something to offer, some special talent or knowledge that made them valuable. But none of them knew how to get things done. Taeyang thought about all the human workers scattered across council space. Peacekeepers protecting borders, engineers maintaining stations, doctors treating diseases, logistics experts moving supplies. While the council talked, humans worked. They fixed broken equipment, delivered food to hungry colonies, stopped fights before they became wars, and kept the infrastructure running. Nobody noticed them. Nobody thanked them. The other species assumed everything just worked automatically. They had no idea how much effort went into keeping their civilization functioning. Chancellor Vess finally called for a vote. Should they form a subcommittee to investigate the possibility of creating a framework for potential action? The vote took 2 hours. The result was that they would meet again next week to discuss the matter further. Taeyang stood up. His movement caught attention because he had been silent for so long. The chamber gradually grew quiet as the other representatives turned to look at the human delegate. He walked slowly to the central platform. His steps echoed in the sudden silence. When he reached the speaking position, he did not make a speech. He simply stated facts. For 8 months, the council had discussed the piracy problem. In that time, 47 ships had been destroyed. Over 2,000 people had died. The pirates had expanded their territory by 30%. Trade losses exceeded 5 billion credits. During those same 8 months, human peacekeepers had stopped 16 different conflicts from starting. Human engineers had prevented 12 major infrastructure failures. Human medical teams had contained 3 disease outbreaks. Human logistics coordinators had delivered emergency supplies to 8 disaster zones. The council had talked. Humans had worked. Taeyang paused and looked around the chamber. Every representative was staring at him now. He continued in the same calm voice. Humanity was giving the council 30 days to take real action on the piracy crisis. Not form a committee, not study the issue. Actually do something. Send ships, stop the attacks, protect the trade routes. If the council could not act in 30 days, humanity would withdraw from council space. The chamber erupted. Representatives shouted in dozens of languages. How dare humans issue ultimatums? Who did they think they were? Humanity was barely significant in galactic politics. They had no right to make demands. Taeyang waited for the noise to die down. Then Minji Park stepped forward. She activated a holographic display that filled the chamber with numbers and charts. Human peacekeepers made up 64% of all active security forces in council space. Human cargo ships carried 71% of essential supplies. Human engineers maintained 89% of critical infrastructure. Human medical personnel staffed 78% of emergency response teams. The numbers hung in the air like an accusation. The chamber fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. It was the silence of people realizing they had made a terrible mistake. Dr. Hajun Lee, the 3rd member of the human delegation, spoke next. His voice was quiet, but everyone heard him clearly. He explained that humans had tried to bring these issues to the council many times. They had submitted reports. They had requested recognition for their workers. They had asked for help sharing the burden. The council had always been too busy discussing other matters. Chancellor Vess stood up, her face showing concern for the first time. She tried to speak smoothly to calm the situation. Perhaps they had not fully appreciated human contributions. Perhaps there had been misunderstandings. Surely they could discuss this reasonably. Taeyang shook his head. Humanity had come to the stars looking for partners. Instead, they found people who wanted an audience. The council was very good at talking. They could debate anything for months. But when it came to actually doing things, they always found reasons to wait. While the council debated, people died. While they discussed protocols, infrastructure failed. While they formed committees, disasters went unanswered. Humans were tired of watching it happen. The 3 human delegates turned and walked toward the exit. Their footsteps echoed through the stunned silence. As they reached the door, a Zalvid representative shouted after them, asking what humanity expected the council to do in just 30 days. Taeyang stopped and looked back one final time. His answer was simple: act, just act. Stop talking and do something. That is all we ever wanted. The door closed behind them. In the corridor outside, Minji asked if he really thought the council would change. Taeyang was quiet for a long moment. Then he said no, he did not think they would change. They had spent too many centuries perfecting the art of discussion. They had forgotten how to do anything else. That was why humanity needed to leave. Not to punish the council, but to stop enabling them. As long as humans kept fixing problems quietly in the background, the council would never learn to take care of itself. Their shuttle departed from the station an hour later. As they pulled away, Taeyang watched the council chamber through the viewport. Inside, the representatives had returned to discussing the human ultimatum. They would probably debate it for weeks. By then, it would be too late. The countdown had started. In 30 days, humanity would be gone, and the galaxy would finally learn what it meant to stand on its own. 6 months had passed since humanity left. The galaxy looked very different now. Council space was falling apart, not everywhere at once, but steadily, like a building collapsing in slow motion. 17 wars had started in regions where human peacekeepers used to maintain order. Trade had dropped by 60% because the supply chains were still broken. Disease outbreaks happened more frequently and spread further. Stations lost power regularly. Communication networks failed without warning. The council met constantly, but the meeting solved nothing. Different species blamed each other. The Zalvids wanted military action to restore order. The Krothians insisted on diplomatic solutions. The Vilnari demanded more time to study the problems. Everyone talked. Nobody agreed. Nothing improved. Chancellor Vess had aged 10 years and 6 months. She barely slept. Every day brought new disasters, new complaints, new demands. Species that had spent centuries in comfortable cooperation now fought over resources and blamed each other for the decline. Meanwhile, humanity thrived. Governor Sora Huang stood on the observation deck of New Terra and looked out at the growing city below. When humans first withdrew from council space, many had worried they would struggle without galactic support. Those fears proved groundless. Human space expanded rapidly. Former council colonies that chose to join humanity experienced immediate improvements. Power stayed on. Food arrived on schedule. Medical care improved. Infrastructure actually worked. People who had lived with constant small problems suddenly discovered what efficiency felt like. It turned out humans did not need the council. They never had. The relationship had always been one-sided, with humanity providing far more than it received. Ji-Won Yoon designed the new power systems for New Terra's expansion. She worked with a freedom she had never experienced in council space. No committees to approve every decision, no debates about whose jurisdiction covered which system. If something needed doing, she did it. She thought sometimes about the Krothian engineers she had left behind at Central Station. She wondered if they had figured out how to keep everything running. Probably not, based on the reports of power failures she heard about. The difference was not intelligence. The Krothians were brilliant. But brilliance without practical experience was useless. They had spent so long letting humans handle the real work that they had forgotten how to do it themselves. The council finally sent an envoy to negotiate. Her name was Krelll, a Krothian diplomat known for her skill in difficult negotiations. She arrived expecting to find desperate refugees. She arrived expecting humans to beg for permission to return. What she found shocked her. Ambassador Taeyang Kim met her in a conference room overlooking New Terra. The city gleamed through the windows, all clean lines and efficient design. Krelll tried not to show her surprise. She had expected something rough and temporary. This looked more advanced than most council stations. She began with the diplomatic speech she had prepared. The council recognized its mistakes. They wanted to acknowledge human contributions properly. They were prepared to offer better representation, more funding, formal honors for human workers. Taeyang listened politely. When she finished, he asked a simple question. What would actually change? Krelll talked about reformed procedures, new councils, better communication. Taeyang shook his head. Those were just more committees, more discussions, more bureaucracy. The fundamental problem remained. The council's entire culture was built on endless debate. They could not change their nature. He explained why humanity would not return. It was not about recognition or respect. It was about fundamental incompatibility. Humans valued action over discussion. They believed in fixing problems immediately rather than studying them endlessly. They thought results mattered more than protocol. The council could not function that way. Their entire society was built on consensus and careful deliberation. That worked fine for philosophy and art. It failed completely for emergency response and practical management. Humanity had spent decades trying to change the council from within. It had not worked. Now they were building something better on their own. Krelll argued that the galaxy needed humanity. Without human workers, everything was collapsing. Surely humans felt some responsibility to help. Taeyang's expression hardened. Humanity had helped for 40 years. They had maintained infrastructure, kept the peace, provided medical care, and coordinated logistics. All while the Council took credit and ignored human suggestions for improvement. Now the galaxy was learning what those services cost. Not in money, but in constant work, attention, and expertise. The Council had assumed it all happened automatically. They never bothered to learn because humans always fixed everything. That was exactly the problem. By doing everything for them, humanity had enabled the Council's dysfunction. The kindest thing humans could do now was let the galaxy learn to manage itself. Krelll left frustrated and worried. On her journey back to Council space, she took a longer route to see the situation firsthand. What she saw horrified her. At one station, she watched engineers struggle with a cooling system malfunction. It should have been a simple repair, but the team did not know the correct procedure. They had to look up every step, debate the right approach, and get authorization for each action. What would have taken a human crew 20 minutes took them 6 hours. The engineers were not stupid. They had training and education. But education without experience was not enough. They had never developed the instincts that came from solving hundreds of similar problems. They overthought everything because they had no practical wisdom to guide them. At another location, she saw a medical team responding to an industrial accident. They had the right equipment and the correct medicine. But they wasted critical time discussing treatment protocols and arguing about who was in charge. A human team would have started treating patients immediately and worked out the details later. The difference was cultural. Council species had spent so long discussing everything that they could not act decisively even in emergencies. Humans had always done the opposite, acting first and discussing later when time allowed. Krelll realized the truth. The galaxy was not collapsing because humans left. It was collapsing because it had been dependent on humans all along. Every species in the Council had become lazy, letting humans handle the difficult, unglamorous work of actually running things. Now they were paying the price for that laziness. She returned to the Council and delivered her report. Humanity would not return. They were building their own civilization and had no need for the Council. If the galaxy wanted to survive, it had to learn to function without human support. Some Council members accepted this reality. They began the hard work of training new specialists and rebuilding competence from scratch. Others remained in denial, insisting that humans would eventually realize they needed the Council. Admiral Junho Park watched the Council debates from the border of human space. His sister Minji had been right all along. Humanity had never needed the Council. The Council had always needed humanity. The question now was whether the galaxy could learn to stand on its own before everything collapsed completely. Some regions were adapting. Others were falling apart. The future would separate those willing to change from those too proud to admit they needed to. Humanity would help the former. But the days of carrying the galaxy were over. 2 years after the withdrawal, the galaxy had split into 3 distinct regions. Human space continued growing and prospering. The reformed territories, led by species willing to change, were slowly rebuilding. And the Hardliner regions, whose leaders refused to adapt, were collapsing into chaos and violence. Valora had never worked so hard in her life. The young Krothian engineer had been assigned to train with human instructors as part of her government's reform program. She arrived expecting classes and lectures. Instead, she found herself working 12-hour shifts maintaining actual systems in actual emergencies. Her instructor was Jiwon Yoon, who had no patience for theoretical discussions. On Valora's first day, Jiwon handed her a toolkit and pointed at a malfunctioning power relay. "Fix it," she said. Valora started to ask for specifications and protocols. Jiwon interrupted. "You already know what is wrong. Stop thinking and start working." Valora was brilliant. She had studied engineering at the best Krothian academy. She knew the theory perfectly. But theory and practice were completely different things. She stared at the relay, paralyzed by uncertainty. What if she made the wrong choice? What if she damaged something? What if there was a better approach she had not considered? Ji-won watched her struggle for a few minutes, then asked a simple question. If this relay fails completely in the next 10 minutes, 100 people lose life support. What do you do? Valora's hands started moving before she consciously decided to act. Her training took over. She isolated the problem, bypassed the faulty component, and rerouted power through a backup circuit. The repair took 3 minutes. Ji-won nodded. That is the difference. In an emergency, you cannot afford to overthink. You need to trust your training enough that your hands know what to do while your brain catches up. Over the following months, Valora learned to work the human way. It was difficult and uncomfortable. Her entire education had taught her to analyze every problem from multiple angles. Humans taught her to assess quickly and act decisively. Both approaches had value, but for practical work under pressure, the human method was simply more effective. Captain Nari Choi led humanitarian missions into reformed territories. Her ships brought supplies and, more importantly, training. Wherever they went, human experts taught local workers how to maintain systems, respond to emergencies, and solve problems independently. It was not charity. Humans made it clear that they would not do the work for anyone. They would teach, advise, and provide temporary assistance. But the locals had to do the actual work. They had to make the mistakes, learn from them, and develop competence through experience. Some communities embraced this approach eagerly. Others struggled with the transition. One station manager complained to Nari that her team was working too slowly. The station needed repairs now, not training sessions. Nari refused to speed up the process. If we do it for you, she explained, you learn nothing. Next time something breaks, you will be just as helpless. We are not here to fix your problems. We are here to teach you how to fix them yourselves. The station manager was frustrated, but he understood. His people needed to develop real skills, not just watch humans work. Dr. Yuna Shin established medical exchange programs with reformed territories. Alien doctors came to study with human emergency teams. The experience shocked most of them. A Velnari physician named Sorix arrived confident in his abilities. He had 20 years of experience and numerous awards. He thought he was just learning some new techniques. His first day with Dr. Shin's team, a transport accident brought in 30 casualties at once. Sorix started examining the first patient carefully, checking vital signs, reviewing symptoms. Dr. Shin pulled him aside and pointed at the others. Those 2 need immediate surgery or they die in 10 minutes. Those 5 need rapid treatment or they die in an hour. The rest can wait. Start with the ones who will die first, Sorix protested. He needed complete information before making treatment decisions. Dr. Shin shook her head. You have incomplete information. You will always have incomplete information in a mass casualty event. Treat based on what you can see, not what you wish you knew. It went against everything Sorix had been taught, but he watched the human medics work. They moved fast, made rapid decisions, and saved lives. Later, he told Dr. Shin that he finally understood the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge was understanding medicine. Wisdom was knowing which patient to treat first when you could not save everyone. While reformed territories worked to rebuild, hardliner regions continued deteriorating. Their leaders refused to accept that they needed to change. They blamed humanity for abandoning them. They blamed reformed territories for betraying galactic unity. They blamed everyone except themselves. War Chief Krelll led the largest hardliner faction. He had been a powerful voice in the old council, always defending traditional approaches and resisting change. Now his territory was falling apart around him, but he could not admit that his policies had failed. Instead, he launched attacks on human humanitarian convoys. He called it defending galactic dignity. In reality, it was desperation. His people were suffering, and he needed someone to blame besides himself. One attack killed dozens of humans who had been bringing medical supplies to a plague zone. Krelll broadcast a message throughout the galaxy, declaring that humanity had abandoned their moral obligations. Ambassador Taeyang Kim watched the broadcast in silence. He felt old anger rising. These people had taken human help for granted for decades. Now they attacked the humans who still tried to help. But Kim did not order military retaliation. Instead, he did something more devastating. He released Krell's complete voting record from the old council. Every vote against infrastructure funding. Every vote blocking human proposals. Every vote dismissing warnings about overdependence. The record showed clearly that Krell himself had created the crisis he now blamed on others. He had voted against every measure that might have prepared his territory for independence. He had opposed every reform that might have reduced dependence on human workers. Kim broadcast a simple message. We will not save those who refuse to save themselves. Hardliner territories are welcome to join the Reformed Alliance, but only if they accept responsibility for their situation and commit to real change. Overseer Ixith led the reformed Crothian territories. She had transformed her entire region's government, eliminating committees without implementation power and requiring all decisions to include action timelines. She met with Ambassador Kim to discuss expanding their partnership. She admitted it was humbling. Her species had spent centuries perfecting the art of philosophical discussion. Now they had to learn the basic craft of getting things done, but they were learning. Slowly, painfully, but steadily, her territory's infrastructure was stabilizing. Trade was recovering. The conflicts were being contained. Kim was impressed but cautious. Cultural change was difficult. There would be setbacks, but Ixith seemed genuinely committed, and her results spoke for themselves. Valora completed her training and returned home. She immediately began training other engineers using human methods. It was difficult. Many of her colleagues resisted. They thought the human approach was crude and unsophisticated. Valora challenged them to prove it. She gave them the same type of emergency scenarios Jiwon had used with her. Most of them froze, unable to act decisively under pressure. Then she demonstrated how to handle the scenarios using what she had learned. Her colleagues were forced to admit that the human methods worked even if they seemed uncomfortable. The galaxy was changing. The species that survived were those willing to abandon comfortable habits and learn difficult lessons. The species that refused to change were slowly disappearing into chaos. Humanity watched from the border, helping those who helped themselves, but refusing to enable dysfunction. The age of carrying the galaxy was over. The age of teaching accountability had begun. 5 years after humanity left the Council, a new galactic civilization was taking shape. The Reformed Alliance had become a genuine partnership of equals. Human and alien workers collaborated on projects across dozens of star systems. The relationship was balanced now. Humans no longer carried the burden alone, and the other species had learned to contribute meaningfully. Commander Minji Park stood at the podium in the new Galactic Institute and looked out at the students filling the auditorium. Humans, Crothians, Velnari, reformed Zalvids, and representatives from a dozen other species sat together, waiting to hear her speak. She told them they were there not because of their species, but because of their commitment. The Institute accepted anyone willing to learn, work hard, and value action over endless discussion. Human exceptionalism, she explained, was never about biology. It was about culture. Work ethic could be learned. Problem-solving skills could be developed. The instinct to act rather than debate could be trained. Any species willing to embrace these values could succeed. The old council had failed because they believed talking was the same as doing. The new alliance succeeded because everyone understood that results required work. Director Valora had traveled a long way from the uncertain trainee who once froze in front of a broken power relay. Now she led the Crothian Reconstruction Authority, overseeing infrastructure development across reformed territories. Today she was celebrating a major achievement. The new power station she designed was coming online. It would serve 3 star systems, providing reliable energy to millions of people. And for the first time, it was built entirely by non-humans without direct human supervision. Jiwon Yoon attended the activation ceremony as a guest. She watched as Valora's team brought the massive station online with smooth precision. Everything worked perfectly. After the ceremony, Valora thanked Jiwon for teaching her. Jiwon smiled and said that Valora had done the real work. Learning was harder than teaching. Valora had been willing to question everything she thought she knew and start over from the beginning. That willingness to change was what separated the reformed territories from the collapsed Hardliner regions. Speaking of Hardliners, they had finally reached their breaking point. War Chief Krell's territory was dying. Disease and starvation were spreading. Infrastructure had collapsed beyond repair. His people were abandoning the region. becoming refugees in reformed space. Krell himself had changed. 2 years ago, he had attacked human convoys and blamed humanity for the galaxy's problems. Now he understood that pride and stubbornness had destroyed his people. He requested permission to address the reformed alliance. The request alone was remarkable. The old Krell would never have asked permission for anything. Ambassador Taeyang Kim sat in the alliance chamber and listened as Krell gave his speech. The once proud war chief looked old and tired. He admitted everything. His faction had been wrong. They had blamed others for problems they created themselves. They had refused to adapt because they could not accept that their traditional ways no longer worked. Now his people were dying. Not from lack of resources, but from lack of capability. They had no one who knew how to maintain infrastructure, coordinate logistics, or respond to emergencies. Generations of depending on others had destroyed their competence. Krell asked for a chance. Not charity, not sympathy, just an opportunity to learn, to prove themselves through work, to rebuild what pride and ignorance had destroyed. The alliance debated for hours. Some wanted to reject the petition as punishment for past attacks. Others argued for acceptance, saying everyone deserved a chance at redemption. Taeyang finally spoke. He reminded everyone why humanity had left the council in the first place. Not for revenge, but because enabling dysfunction helped no one. By leaving, they had forced the galaxy to learn responsibility. Some species learned quickly. Others took longer. But everyone who genuinely wanted to change deserved support. However, support came with requirements. Hardliner territories could join the alliance only on probation. They had to meet strict performance standards. They had to demonstrate real change through actions, not promises. The alliance approved probationary membership for the Hardliner refugees. It would be difficult. Many would fail. But those willing to work hard would find help. Governor Sora Huang dedicated the expansion quarter of New Terra. The new section had been built collaboratively by humans and reformed species working as equal partners. The architecture blended different cultural styles while maintaining the engineering standards that made everything function reliably. She spoke about what the expansion represented. Different species could maintain their unique identities while committing to shared standards of excellence. You did not have to become human to adopt human work ethics. You just had to value competence over comfortable tradition. A Crothian architect told her afterward that the project had taught his people an important lesson. Debate had its place in art and philosophy, but foundations required action. You could discuss artistic choices endlessly, but the building still needed to stand up. Taeyang Kim returned to the old council chamber one last time. It had been converted into the main hall of the Galactic Institute. Students now learned in the space where representatives had once talked endlessly without accomplishing anything. A student approached him, asking if humanity regretted leaving the council. Kim thought carefully before answering. He regretted that leaving had been necessary, but he did not regret the decision itself. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you could do was refuse to enable dysfunction. By leaving, humanity had forced the galaxy to grow up. Now they were building together as partners rather than as caretakers and dependents. That was the relationship humanity had always wanted. The galaxy was not perfect. Problems still arose. But now, when emergencies happened, multiple species responded effectively. When infrastructure needed maintenance, trained workers from different species handled it competently. When crises emerged, people acted decisively instead of forming committees. The Reformed Alliance Summit brought representatives from across the new galactic order. Ships from dozens of species arrived at New Terra. Kim watched from his office window as the vessels docked. Commander Park stood beside him. She noted that they had finally achieved what humanity sought when they first joined the old council. Genuine partnership, Kim agreed, but added an important point. The difference now was that everyone understood partnership required work, not just words. Everyone contributed. Everyone took responsibility. Nobody expected others to carry them. A distress call interrupted their conversation. A mining station was experiencing a cascade system failure. Kim and Park went to the command center to monitor the response. The nearest response team was mixed. 2 humans, 3 Crothians, and a former hardliner Zalvid working together. They arrived quickly and began repairs without any discussion about jurisdiction or protocol. Each person knew their role. They worked smoothly as a unit, solving the crisis in under an hour. After the emergency ended, the Zalvid officer sent a message thanking the command center for the coordination. She added a personal note. Her people used to debate who had authority over emergencies, while the emergencies got worse. Now they simply acted. She was grateful to have learned this lesson before it was too late for her species. The human officer replied simply, "That is all we ever wanted. Partners who understand that action speaks louder than discussion." That evening, Kim recorded a message for the Institute archives. Future students would study this period of history, and he wanted them to understand the real lesson. Humanity did not save the galaxy. They forced it to save itself. Sometimes the greatest gift was not solving problems for others, but refusing to enable their avoidance of responsibility. The galaxy had learned to bear its own cost, and in accepting that burden it had found real strength. Not the strength of depending on others to fix everything, but the strength that came from competence and accountability. The stars still shone. Ships still traveled between worlds. Different species still worked together. But now they worked as equals, each contributing, each taking responsibility, each understanding that civilization required constant effort from everyone. The age of endless discussion was over. The age of meaningful action had begun, and the galaxy was better for it.